Hashtag the arena's new blood. The Nexus Arena floated in the void between three dying stars, a massive structure of crystalline walls and energy barriers that had witnessed 1,000 species rise and fall in combat. For over 2 centuries, it had been the crown jewel of the Galactic Combat Federation, where the strongest warriors from across the known universe gathered to prove their worth in brutal gladiatorial matches that could make or break entire civilizations. Marcus Chun had never imagined he would end up here when he volunteered for the deep space exploration mission 3 years ago. The human colony ship Endeavour had been exploring uncharted territories when they encountered the Zephyrian patrol fleet. What followed was a brief but decisive encounter that ended with humanity's first contact with a greater galactic community, and Marcus finding himself sold into the gladiatorial circuits as part of what the Zephyrians called debt settlement for entering their space without permission. The holding cells beneath the arena were a maze of different atmospheric chambers, each designed to accommodate the unique environmental needs of dozens of species. Marcus had spent the last 6 weeks learning the hard way that humans were considered among the weakest creatures ever brought to fight in the Nexus. The other gladiators made no secret of their disdain for what they saw as a pathetic addition to their ranks. Korvac the Destroyer, a massive reptilian creature from the Zirian system, stood nearly 12 feet tall with scales harder than military-grade armor plating. His 4 arms ended in claws that could tear through steel, and his victories in the arena numbered in the hundreds. When he first saw Marcus being processed into the gladiator quarters, his booming laughter had echoed through the entire level. "They bring us a soft-skinned weakling," Korvac had roared, his voice carrying the distinctive growl of his species. "Look at it. No claws, no fangs, no natural armor. What is this thing supposed to fight with? Its tiny teeth." The other gladiators had joined in the mockery. Sci-Fi, a serpentine warrior whose species could unhinge their jaws and swallow prey whole, had slithered closer to examine Marcus like he was studying a particularly unimpressive meal. "I have eaten creatures larger and more dangerous than this human," she hissed, her forked tongue testing the air. Perhaps the arena masters have confused the food supply with the fighters. Even Brutox, the rock-like being from the heavy gravity world of Granite Prime, had expressed confusion at Marcus's presence. Brutox rarely spoke, communicating mainly through grinding sounds made by rubbing his stone limbs together. But his meaning was clear when he gestured dismissively at the human's slight frame. The arena's current champion was a creature that defied easy description. Vorthak the Inevitable stood 8 feet tall and possessed 6 limbs, each capable of independent thought and action thanks to multiple nerve clusters throughout its body. Its species, the Hegemony Elites, had evolved for warfare with redundant organs and the ability to continue fighting even after sustaining what would be fatal injuries to most creatures. Vorthak had held the championship for 18 months, longer than any gladiator in recent history. Marcus had watched Vorthak's fights on the viewing screens in the common area, studying the champion's technique with the focused attention of someone whose life depended on learning fast. Vorthak fought with a cold, calculated brutality that seemed to anticipate every move its opponents would make. The creature's 6 limbs moved in perfect coordination, wielding different weapons while simultaneously blocking and striking. Its victories weren't just wins. They were masterpieces of violent artistry that left audiences speechless and opponents dead. The betting pools for matches involving humans had become something of a running joke among the arena's regular spectators. The odds were always astronomical against the human surviving more than a few minutes, let alone winning. Marcus had learned from the arena's data systems that the previous human gladiators had lasted an average of 3 minutes and 14 seconds in actual combat before being killed, maimed, or forced to surrender. This information wasn't particularly encouraging, but Marcus had advantages that the odds makers didn't fully understand. His military background had taught him to analyze weaknesses and exploit them, skills that had served him well during his time as a special operations officer in the Terran Defense Corps. More importantly, he possessed something that many of the other gladiators lacked despite their superior physical attributes: the ability to adapt and learn from observation. While his fellow prisoners spent their time boasting about past victories or planning elaborate revenge schemes, Marcus devoted every waking hour to study. He memorized the fighting styles of each species, cataloged their strengths, and weaknesses and began to understand the deeper patterns that governed arena combat. The other gladiators saw this as further evidence of human weakness, mistaking careful preparation for cowardice. The soft skin studies us like prey studies predators, Korvac would joke to his followers. It knows it cannot fight, so it watches and hopes to learn the secret of not dying quickly. What they didn't understand was that Marcus had already begun to see opportunities where others saw only overwhelming disadvantages. His smaller size and lighter frame meant he could move faster than most opponents expected. His lack of natural weapons forced him to be creative in ways that creatures born with built-in advantages never needed to develop. Most importantly, his humanity gave him access to something that seemed to be rare in the galaxy: the ability to fight dirty when necessary. The arena's training facilities were open to all gladiators during designated hours, though most species naturally segregated themselves based on similar environmental needs or social hierarchies. Marcus trained alone, using equipment designed for much larger and stronger beings, but gradually adapting his techniques to work with what was available. He couldn't match Korvac's raw strength, but he could learn to use leverage and momentum to multiply his own limited power. He couldn't grow natural armor like Brutox, but he could study the defensive patterns that had kept other gladiators alive long enough to develop their reputations. The Arena Masters, a secretive council of representatives from the galaxy's major powers, took notice of Marcus's dedication to training, though they interpreted it differently than he might have hoped. To them, his efforts represented a desperate attempt by an inferior species to postpone the inevitable. They began planning special exhibition matches designed to showcase the futility of human ambition against superior galactic species. Arena Master Xyloth, a being whose species had transcended physical form thousands of years ago and now existed as patterns of living energy within crystalline matrices, observed Marcus's training sessions with something approaching scientific curiosity. The human displays admirable persistence. Xyloth communicated to its fellow masters through direct energy transfer. It continues to prepare for battles it cannot hope to survive. Perhaps there is entertainment value in observing how long such delusion can be maintained. The other masters agreed that Marcus would make an excellent example for newer gladiators about the dangers of overestimating one's abilities. They began to craft a schedule of increasingly difficult opponents, starting with mid-level fighters and working up to encounters that would demonstrate the vast gulf between human capabilities and those of truly evolved warrior species. Marcus remained unaware of these plans, focusing instead on the immediate challenge of surviving his first official arena match. The exhibition fights he'd participated in so far had been against automated training dummies and holographic opponents designed to test basic combat reflexes. His real test would come against a living opponent who wanted to kill him, not just score points or provide entertainment. The night before his first scheduled match, Marcus lay on the hard sleeping surface in his cell and thought about home. Earth seemed impossibly far away, not just in distance, but in relevance to his current situation. The Marcus Chun who had volunteered for deep space exploration felt like a different person, someone naive enough to believe that humanity's first contact with alien civilization would involve diplomatic exchanges and cultural learning rather than slavery and forced combat. But that version of himself was gone, replaced by someone harder and more focused. The Marcus who would enter the arena tomorrow had learned to see violence not as a last resort, but as a tool to be mastered and applied with precision. He had studied his opponents not with the academic interest of an explorer, but with the cold calculation of a predator planning his next hunt. The other gladiators had stopped openly mocking him weeks ago, though not because they developed any respect for his abilities. Instead, they'd simply lost interest in tormenting someone they viewed as already dead. This suited Marcus perfectly, as it allowed him to continue his preparations without interference or distraction. As he drifted towards sleep, Marcus reviewed the information he'd gathered about his first opponent, a Kandorian warrior named Thex who specialized in rapid, overwhelming attacks designed to end fights quickly. Thex had won 47 matches and lost only 3, making him a mid-tier fighter with legitimate credentials and a reputation for showmanship that pleased the crowds. Tomorrow would determine whether Marcus's months of preparation had any practical value or if he was simply another example of human delusion about to be corrected by galactic reality. Either way, he would enter that arena with everything he'd learned and every advantage he could create for himself. The first match would be just the beginning. Hashtag First Blood, the arena's morning preparation rituals began before the artificial dawn cycle illuminated the gladiator quarters. Marcus had been awake for hours, running through his mental preparation routines, while the other fighters slowly emerged from their various forms of sleep. The atmosphere in the common areas carried an electric tension that spoke of coming violence and the possibility of death before the day ended. Thex the Kandorian had arrived at the arena 3 days earlier as part of a traveling exhibition tour, bringing with him a reputation that preceded his physical presence by several star systems. Kandorians were built for speed and aggression, with elongated limbs that could strike faster than most creatures could react, and a nervous system optimized for combat reflexes. Their homeworld's high gravity and predator-rich environment had produced a species that viewed fighting as both art form and religious expression. Standing 7 feet tall, with a lean but muscular frame covered in natural ridged armor, Thex moved through the gladiator quarters with the confident grace of someone who had never questioned his place in the universe's hierarchy. His elongated head featured 4 forward-facing eyes that could track multiple targets simultaneously, while his arms extended into hands that ended in retractable claws capable of slicing through most organic materials. "Today, I face the human curiosity," Thex announced to anyone within hearing range as he performed his pre-fight stretching routine. "I admit, I'm interested to see what strategies such a primitive creature might attempt before I end its existence." The Kandorian's voice carried the musical quality typical of his species, but underneath the melodious tones lay unmistakable predatory anticipation. Thex had studied recordings of human anatomy and combat techniques, such as they were, and had concluded that the match would provide an opportunity for some creative finishing moves that would entertain the crowd while demonstrating Kandorian superiority. Marcus watched Thex's preparation from across the common area, noting the precise timing of the alien's movements and the way his 4 eyes constantly scanned for potential threats even during routine activities. Kandorians had evolved as pack hunters, and their combat instincts reflected thousands of generations of cooperative predation against prey that had developed increasingly sophisticated survival mechanisms. The betting pools for the day's matches displayed on screens throughout the facility showed odds of 800 to 1 against Marcus, lasting more than 5 minutes in the arena. The more specific proposition bets were even more brutal, with the most popular wager being whether the human would be killed by Thex's claws or his teeth. Very few beings had bothered placing money on the possibility of Marcus achieving anything resembling a victory. Arena preparation staff moved through the quarters, distributing the standard pre-fight supplements and conducting final medical examinations to ensure that all gladiators were healthy enough to provide entertaining deaths. Marcus submitted to the scans and injections with the same compliance he'd shown throughout his time in the facility, giving no indication of the strategies he'd developed or the observations he'd made about arena operations. The medical technicians, members of a neutral species that specialized in maintaining biological systems, noted that Marcus's stress indicators remained remarkably low for someone about to face almost certain death. This struck them as either evidence of profound mental preparation or complete psychological breakdown. But their job was to ensure physical readiness rather than mental evaluation, so they cleared him for combat without additional investigation. 2 hours before the scheduled match, Marcus was escorted to the preparation chamber, where gladiators received their weapon assignments and final briefings about arena conditions. The chamber's walls displayed tactical information about the fighting environment, including gravity settings, atmospheric composition, and any special features that might affect combat strategy. Today's arena configuration featured standard galactic atmospheric conditions with gravity set at 1.2 times standard to favor stronger combatants. The fighting surface consisted of variable terrain, including elevated platforms, defensive barriers, and several hazards designed to force gladiators into close-quarters combat rather than allowing them to rely purely on ranged attacks. Weapon selection for this match followed traditional gladiatorial protocols, with each fighter choosing from a preset array of armaments suited to their species, physical capabilities, and fighting styles. Thex selected his preferred combination of curved blades designed to maximize the effectiveness of Kandorian slashing attacks, along with a lightweight energy shield that could deflect most projectile weapons while allowing for rapid movement. Marcus studied the available human-compatible weapons with careful attention, knowing that his choice in this moment might determine whether he lived long enough to learn from the experience. The options were limited, reflecting the arena master's assumption that humans lacked the physical capabilities to effectively use most advanced armaments. He could choose from basic metallic blades, primitive projectile weapons, or simple energy tools that required minimal technological interface. After careful consideration, Marcus selected what appeared to be the most basic option available: a simple staff weapon approximately 6 feet in length, made from a composite material that could conduct and focus energy while remaining light enough for extended use. To observers, this choice seemed to confirm every assumption about human limitations, as staff weapons were typically considered training tools rather than serious combat armaments. What the observers didn't understand was that Marcus had spent considerable time studying the staff specifications and had developed techniques specifically designed to exploit its unique properties. The weapon's length would allow him to maintain distance from Thex's claws, while its energy conduction capabilities could be used in ways that most gladiators had never considered necessary to learn. The final hour before combat was traditionally reserved for meditation or final strategic planning, depending on each species' psychological preparation methods. Marcus used this time to review every detail he'd observed about Kandorian physiology and combat patterns, constructing multiple scenario trees that accounted for various possible openings to the fight and Thex's most likely responses to different tactical approaches. Kandorians favored overwhelming initial attacks designed to end fights quickly, believing that prolonged combat was inefficient and demonstrated lack of skill. They typically opened with coordinated strikes from multiple limbs while advancing rapidly to deny opponents time for defensive positioning. Their natural armor provided protection against most counterattacks during these opening sequences, allowing them to focus entirely on offensive action without concern for their own safety. However, Marcus had identified several potential weaknesses in this approach. Kandorian aggression could become predictable if properly understood, and their confidence in their natural advantages sometimes led them to overlook environmental factors that could be exploited by a more creative opponent. Most importantly, their emphasis on quick victories meant they had limited experience adapting to unexpected tactical situations or opponents who could survive their initial assault. The arena's announcement system activated 30 minutes before the scheduled match, broadcasting details about the combatants to the assembled audience. The facility could accommodate over 100,000 spectators representing dozens of different species, each with their own viewing requirements and atmospheric preferences. Today's crowd included a significant number of Kandorians who had traveled specifically to witness Thex demonstrate their species' martial superiority. Citizens of the galaxy, the announcement began in the melodious tones of the arena's artificial intelligence system. Today we present a contest between established prowess and untested potential. Thex of Kandor brings 47 victories and a reputation for swift, decisive combat. His opponent represents the recently contacted human species, making their debut in our sacred arena. The crowd's response was immediate and overwhelming, with the vast majority of spectators expressing enthusiastic anticipation of watching Thex demonstrate proper combat technique against an obviously inferior opponent. The few beings who had placed money on Marcus surviving more than a few minutes were largely motivated by the potential for enormous payouts rather than any genuine confidence in human capabilities. Marcus could hear the crowd's reaction from the preparation chamber, and he used the sound to focus his mental preparation rather than allowing it to create additional pressure. He had long since accepted that he would be fighting alone, without support or encouragement from the audience, and had learned to draw strength from that isolation rather than being weakened by it. 10 minutes before the match, both gladiators were moved to the final staging areas immediately adjacent to the arena floor. These chambers provided direct views of the combat environment and allowed fighters to make any last-minute adjustments to their strategies based on actual conditions rather than the general briefings provided earlier. Thex used this time to perform a series of ritual movements designed to prepare his nervous system for maximum combat efficiency. His four eyes tracking every detail of the arena's layout while his limbs loosened and prepared for the explosive movements that had made him famous throughout his region of the galaxy. Marcus stood quietly in his staging area, staff weapon held loosely in his hands while he visualized the opening moments of combat with crystalline clarity. Every possible scenario played out in his mind, along with his planned responses and backup strategies for each situation. He had trained for months specifically for this moment, and now it was time to discover whether his preparation had any value when tested against galactic reality. The final countdown began, echoing through both staging areas and throughout the arena complex. In 5 minutes, the barriers would drop, and Marcus would face his first real test as a gladiator. Success would mean survival and the opportunity to continue learning and adapting. Failure would mean death and confirmation of every assumption the galaxy had made about human weakness. Either way, the galaxy was about to learn something new about humanity. Hashtag the unexpected victory. The arena barriers dissolve in a cascade of shimmering energy, revealing the combat zone in all its carefully designed complexity. The fighting surface stretched nearly 200 meters across, featuring multiple levels connected by ramps and bridges, with scattered obstacles that could provide cover or create tactical opportunities for fighters skilled enough to recognize them. The gravity field hummed with barely audible intensity as it maintained the enhanced conditions that would favor physically stronger combatants. Marcus stepped onto the arena floor with measured steps, his staff weapon held in a defensive position that suggested caution rather than aggression. The crowd's response was immediate and dismissive, with various species expressing their amusement at the humans' obvious reluctance to engage in proper combat behavior. To most observers, Marcus appeared to be delaying the inevitable rather than implementing any coherent strategy. Thex emerged from the opposite staging area with a fluid grace that had made Kandorians legendary throughout the galaxy's fighting circuits. His four eyes locked onto Marcus immediately, tracking the human's movements while simultaneously scanning for environmental factors that might influence the upcoming encounter. The Kandorian's confidence radiated from every movement, conveying absolute certainty that this match would end quickly and decisively in his favor. "Human creature," Thex called out across the arena floor, his musical voice carrying easily over the crowd noise. "I offer you the opportunity to surrender now and spare yourself unnecessary pain. My people value efficiency, and there is no honor in prolonging inevitable outcomes." Marcus didn't respond verbally, instead using the time while Thex spoke to position himself near one of the arena's larger obstacles, a crystalline formation that could provide partial cover while offering multiple angles for movement. His apparent retreat toward defensive positions drew additional derisive sounds from the audience, confirming their expectations about human cowardice in the face of superior opposition. The official combat signal resonated through the arena with a deep, harmonious tone that had traditionally marked the beginning of gladiatorial contests for over 2 centuries. Within seconds of that sound, Thex launched himself forward with the explosive speed that had earned him his reputation, covering the distance between them faster than most creatures could track with their eyes. The Kandorian's opening attack followed the classic pattern of his species, multiple limbs striking simultaneously from different angles, while his momentum carried him into close range, where his natural advantages would be overwhelming. His claws extended to their full length as he approached, seeking to end the fight with the initial contact through precise strikes to vital organs. Marcus had spent months studying recordings of exactly this type of attack, and his response demonstrated the value of that preparation. Instead of attempting to block or counter the incoming strikes directly, he used his staff weapon to redirect his own movement, vaulting sideways and upward in a direction that Thex hadn't anticipated. The Kandorian's claws passed through empty air where Marcus had been standing moments earlier, while the human landed on an elevated platform that provided both defensive advantages and new tactical options. The crowd's reaction shifted from bored anticipation to mild surprise as they witnessed the first exchange. Most had expected the fight to end within seconds, with Thex demonstrating proper Kandorian technique against helpless prey. The human's ability to avoid that initial attack suggested the possibility of slightly longer, though ultimately unchanged, outcome. Thex recovered from his missed attack with the fluid grace of a trained combatant, immediately repositioning to pursue his opponent to the higher ground. Kandorians were excellent climbers, with their elongated limbs providing superior reach and their natural strength allowing them to move vertically almost as quickly as they could run on level surfaces. Interesting, Thex called out as he began scaling the platform where Marcus had taken position. The human creature possesses some basic survival instincts. This may provide marginally more entertainment before the inevitable conclusion. Marcus waited until Thex was committed to his climbing motion before implementing the second phase of his strategy. The staff weapon's energy conduction properties have been dismissed by most observers as largely irrelevant to serious combat. But Marcus had discovered that these same properties could be used to interact with the arena's own energy systems in unexpected ways. The crystalline obstacle that Marcus had positioned himself near wasn't simply decorative. Like most arena features, it contained sophisticated energy management systems designed to maintain structural integrity under the stresses of gladiatorial combat. By applying precisely calibrated energy pulses through his staff weapon, Marcus could influence these systems in ways that their original designers had never intended. The result was a controlled destabilization of the crystalline formation that caused it to shift position just as Thex reached the top of his climb. The Kandorian found himself grappling with a surface that was no longer stable. His natural climbing advantages suddenly transformed into vulnerabilities as the platform tilted at an unexpected angle. Thex managed to avoid falling, but his recovery required several seconds during which he couldn't mount an effective attack. Marcus used this window to implement the next element of his plan, moving to a position where he could take advantage of the terrain features while maintaining distance from Thex's superior reach and speed. The crowd's murmur grew louder as they began to realize that something unexpected was happening. The human wasn't simply running away or delaying defeat through cowardice. Instead, he appeared to be implementing a coherent strategy that took advantage of environmental factors in ways that none of them had anticipated. Arena Master Xyloth observed the developing situation with increased attention, its energy patterns shifting to reflect genuine interest rather than the academic curiosity it had shown earlier. The human demonstrates understanding of arena systems that exceeds our initial assessments. It communicated to the other masters. Perhaps there is more complexity to this species than preliminary evaluations indicated. Thex completed his recovery and launched another attack, this time approaching more cautiously as he began to realize that his opponent possessed capabilities beyond what initial observations had suggested. The Kandorian's tactical flexibility was considerable, and he quickly adapted his strategy to account for Marcus's demonstrated ability to manipulate environmental factors. The second exchange took place on more level ground, with Thex using his superior reach to probe Marcus's defenses while avoiding commitment to attacks that could leave him vulnerable to unexpected countermoves. His claws struck repeatedly at the human's staff weapon, testing its durability while searching for openings that would allow him to press his natural advantages. Marcus found himself pushed to the limits of his preparation as he worked to counter Thex's more careful approach. The Kandorian's speed and reach were exactly as formidable as his research had indicated, and maintaining effective defense required absolute focus and precise timing. Every movement had to serve multiple purposes, blocking incoming attacks, positioning for potential counters, and maintaining the mobility that was his only significant advantage. The turning point came when Thex, growing frustrated with the human's persistent survival, committed to a more aggressive attack pattern that sacrificed some defensive positioning in favor of overwhelming offensive pressure. His forelimbs struck in rapid succession, creating a complex pattern of attacks that should have been impossible for any opponent to counter effectively. Marcus had been waiting for exactly this type of commitment, and his response demonstrated the deepest level of his preparation. Instead of trying to block or evade all four attacks, he focused on redirecting just one of them in a way that would disrupt the Kandorian's balance and create an opening for counterattack. Using his staff weapon as both lever and fulcrum, Marcus caught Thex's leading arm at precisely the right angle to redirect its momentum while simultaneously positioning himself for a strike at one of the vulnerable points he'd identified during his months of study. The energy-conducting properties of his weapon allowed him to deliver a precisely focused shock directly to Thex's central nervous system, causing temporary paralysis that lasted just long enough for Marcus to complete his attack. The crowd fell silent as Thex collapsed to the arena floor, his nervous system temporarily disrupted but his life intact. Marcus stood over his fallen opponent, staff weapon held ready to deliver a killing blow if necessary. But he made no move to complete the execution that gladiatorial tradition demanded. For several seconds, the only sound in the massive arena was the hum of the gravity generators and the whisper of air circulation systems. 100,000 spectators struggled to process what they had just witnessed. A human gladiator had defeated a respected Kandorian warrior through strategy, preparation, and precise execution rather than superior strength or natural advantages. Arena Master Xylotha's energy patterns fluctuated rapidly as it processed the implications of what had occurred. The human had not simply survived through luck or Kandorian error. Instead, Marcus had demonstrated a level of tactical sophistication and environmental awareness that suggested capabilities far beyond what any previous assessment had indicated. Thex slowly regained consciousness and mobility, his nervous system recovering from the precisely targeted disruption. The Kandorian warrior looked up at Marcus with something approaching respect, recognizing that he had been outfought by a superior strategist, rather than simply overwhelmed by greater power. "I yield," Thex announced, his musical voice carrying clearly throughout the stunned arena. "The human has demonstrated mastery that exceeds my own abilities." Marcus stepped back and lowered his weapon, accepting the surrender with the dignity that proper gladiatorial protocol demanded. He had achieved something that nobody in the arena had thought possible. Not just survival, but victory over a respected opponent through skill rather than chance. The implications of this outcome would resonate far beyond the arena floor. But for now, Marcus simply stood victorious while the galaxy began to reassess its assumptions about humanity's place in the cosmic hierarchy. Rising through the ranks. The weeks following Marcus's victory over Thex transformed his status within the arena complex in ways that nobody had anticipated. The betting pools that had once offered astronomical odds against his survival now featured much more conservative numbers, though most bookmakers still considered him an unlikely prospect for sustained success. More significantly, his fellow gladiators began treating him as a legitimate competitor rather than an amusing curiosity waiting to die. Korvac the Destroyer was among the first to acknowledge the shift in Marcus's standing, though his recognition came with characteristic bluntness that reflected his species' direct approach to all social interactions. The massive reptilian warrior cornered Marcus in the training area 3 days after the Kandorian match, his 4 arms crossed in a gesture that could indicate either challenge or grudging respect. "Human Marcus," Korvac rumbled, his voice carrying the deep harmonics that made Xerian speech sound like controlled earthquakes. "Your victory over the Kandorian was not chance. I watched recordings multiple times. You fought with intelligence and preparation. This is worthy of acknowledgement." Coming from a creature whose species valued martial prowess above all other qualities, Korvac's statement represented a significant shift in perception. Other gladiators who overheard the exchange began to reassess their own attitudes toward the human who had demonstrated capabilities beyond their initial assumptions. Sci-Fi, the serpentine warrior who had originally dismissed Marcus as potential prey, approached him with a different kind of interest. Her species valued cunning and strategic thinking as much as physical capabilities, and Marcus's tactical approach to combat appealed to their predatory instincts in ways that simple strength could not. "Your methods are unusual, human," Sci-Fi hissed, her forked tongue testing the air around Marcus as she spoke. "Most gladiators rely on natural advantages or superior training. You use the arena itself as a weapon. This demonstrates understanding that few possess." These conversations marked the beginning of an unexpected development in Marcus's gladiatorial career. Other fighters began seeking his insights about arena tactics and environmental exploitation. Species that had dominated their home worlds through superior physical attributes found themselves curious about the strategic approaches that had allowed a supposedly inferior human to defeat a respected opponent. Marcus shared his knowledge selectively, recognizing that every gladiator he helped train might eventually become an opponent. However, He also understood that building alliances and gaining respect among his fellow fighters could provide advantages that pure combat skill alone might not achieve. The gladiatorial system encouraged individual competition, but survival often required more complex social dynamics. The arena masters observed these developments with intense interest, recognizing that Marcus's influence on gladiator culture represented something unprecedented in the facility's history. Traditional gladiatorial hierarchies were based on simple combat prowess and species-based advantages. The introduction of tactical sophistication and environmental manipulation as respected skills threatened to disrupt established patterns in ways that could affect the entire entertainment industry. Arena Master Xyloth convened emergency sessions with its fellow administrators to discuss the implications of Marcus's growing influence. The human success had generated tremendous interest among spectators, leading to increased attendance and betting activity that benefited the arena's financial operations. However, his methods also encouraged other gladiators to think more creatively about combat approaches, potentially making matches less predictable and harder to control. The human phenomenon requires careful management. Xyloth communicated to the other masters through direct energy transfer. His influence enhances immediate entertainment value, but may compromise long-term operational predictability. We must determine whether this development serves our interests or threatens established systems. The Masters ultimately decided to accelerate Marcus's progression through the gladiatorial rankings, scheduling him for increasingly challenging opponents that would test his capabilities while providing maximum spectacle for audiences. If he continued to succeed, his victories would generate substantial revenue and establish the arena as the premier destination for innovative combat entertainment. If he failed, his defeat would serve as a cautionary tale about the limits of strategy when faced with overwhelming physical superiority. Marcus's second official match pitted him against Gordhak, a warrior from the heavy-gravity world of Titan VII whose species had evolved to withstand crushing atmospheric pressure and gravitational forces that would kill most other creatures instantly. Gordhak stood 9 feet tall and weighed nearly 1,000 pounds, with bone density and muscle strength that made him virtually immune to conventional weapons and most energy attacks. The betting pools for this match reflected genuine uncertainty about the outcome for the first time in Marcus's gladiatorial career. His demonstrated ability to exploit environmental factors and unexpected tactics had created legitimate doubt about whether simple physical advantages could guarantee victory against properly applied human ingenuity. Gordhak himself approached the upcoming fight with a mixture of curiosity and professional respect that marked a significant departure from the casual dismissal that had characterized most gladiators' attitudes toward human opponents. The Titan VII native had studied recordings of Marcus's previous victory and recognized the sophisticated planning and execution that had made it possible. "I have never faced an opponent who fought with such methods," Gordhak admitted during a pre-fight interview conducted for arena publicity purposes. "My species relies on strength and endurance. If the human can neutralize these advantages, the outcome becomes uncertain." Marcus used his preparation time for the Gordhak match to study the unique challenges posed by an opponent whose advantages were so overwhelming that conventional tactical approaches would be insufficient. Titan VII natives possessed redundant organ systems that allowed them to continue fighting even after sustaining injuries that would incapacitate most creatures. Their natural armor could deflect energy weapons and absorb kinetic impacts that would shatter most materials. However, Marcus's analysis revealed that these same evolutionary advantages came with corresponding limitations. Gordhak's massive size and weight made rapid movement difficult, while his species' reliance on raw strength had not encouraged the development of sophisticated defensive techniques against unconventional attacks. Most importantly, his natural immunity to most forms of damage had created a psychological vulnerability. Gordhak had never learned to adapt quickly when his usual advantages failed to provide expected results. The arena configuration for their match featured enhanced gravity settings and reduced atmospheric density, conditions designed to favor creatures from high-pressure environments while creating additional challenges for beings adapted to more standard conditions. Marcus would be fighting at a significant disadvantage before combat even began, making his strategic preparation even more critical to survival. His weapon selection for this fight required careful consideration of Gordhack's specific vulnerabilities and the unique environmental conditions they would face. The staff weapon that had served him well against Thex would be inadequate against an opponent whose natural armor could absorb and deflect most energy attacks. Instead, Marcus chose a combination of tools designed to exploit mechanical advantages and create cumulative effects that could overcome individual resistance to damage. The crowd that assembled for the Marcus Gordhack match was notably larger and more diverse than typical arena audiences, reflecting the growing galactic interest in human combat capabilities. Representatives from dozens of species had traveled specifically to witness whether the humans' previous victory represented genuine skill or fortunate coincidence. The betting pools showed much closer odds than Marcus's first fight, with many spectators placing significant wagers on the possibility of another unexpected human victory. Gordhack entered the arena with the ponderous confidence of a creature that had never been seriously challenged by an opponent of inferior size and strength. His species' traditional combat approach emphasized overwhelming force applied through direct confrontation, tactics that had served them well throughout their history of intertribal warfare and territorial expansion. Marcus emerged from his staging area with the same measured composure he had displayed before his first fight, though observers with sufficient perception could detect the increased intensity of his preparation and focus. He understood that this match would determine whether his previous victory had been the beginning of a legitimate gladiatorial career or simply an anomalous result that could not be repeated against more formidable opposition. The combat signal resonated through the arena with its traditional harmonic tones, and both fighters began the approaches that would determine whether human strategic thinking could overcome Titan 7 evolutionary advantages. The galaxy watched with unprecedented attention as Marcus prepared to test the true limits of what preparation and ingenuity could achieve against overwhelming physical superiority. #Champions Path 6 months after his first victory in the arena, Marcus Chun stood in the Champions Preparation Chamber, a space that had been occupied by the galaxy's most feared warriors for over 2 centuries. The journey from dismissed curiosity to legitimate contender had required more than just tactical brilliance and adaptive strategy. It had demanded a fundamental transformation in how he understood combat, survival, and the deeper currents that govern gladiatorial culture. His victory over Gordhack had established Marcus as more than a clever underdog who had achieved one surprising result. The match against the Titan 7 warrior had lasted nearly an hour, with Marcus systematically dismantling his opponent's advantages through a combination of environmental manipulation, psychological warfare, and precise application of mechanical leverage that had never before been seen in arena combat. Gordhack's eventual defeat had come not through overwhelming force, but through the cumulative effect of dozens of precisely targeted attacks that exploited the tiny vulnerabilities that existed even in seemingly impregnable defenses. The Arena Masters had responded to Marcus's continued success by accelerating his progression through the rankings at an unprecedented pace. Traditional gladiatorial advancement typically required years of careful development, with fighters gradually earning opportunities to face increasingly skilled opponents. Marcus's rapid rise reflected both the entertainment value of his unique approach and the master's desire to discover the ultimate limits of human capabilities. Now he faced the ultimate test, a championship match against Gordhack the Inevitable, the creature whose 6-limbed mastery of combat had dominated the arena for longer than any gladiator in recent memory. Gordhack's fighting style represented the pinnacle of what evolved martial prowess could achieve, combining perfect physical conditioning with tactical sophistication that had proven superior to every challenger for 18 months of competition. The betting pools for the championship match showed odds that reflected genuine uncertainty about the outcome, something that would have been unimaginable when Marcus first arrived at the arena. His demonstrated ability to defeat opponents who possessed overwhelming physical advantages had created legitimate doubt about whether traditional measures of gladiatorial supremacy still applied when faced with human strategic thinking. Marcus had spent weeks studying every available recording of Gordhack's fights, analyzing the champion's techniques with the same methodical attention that had served him throughout his rise through the rankings. What he discovered was both encouraging and terrifying. Vorthak fought with a level of sophistication that approached his own, but backed by physical capabilities that exceeded anything Marcus had previously encountered. The hegemony elite species had evolved for warfare, with redundant organs that allowed them to continue fighting even after sustaining normally fatal injuries. Their 6 limbs could operate independently while maintaining perfect coordination, creating attack patterns that seemed to violate the basic principles of physics. Most importantly, Vorthak had demonstrated the ability to adapt and learn during combat, analyzing his opponent's strategies in real time and developing countermeasures that made their initial advantages irrelevant. The other gladiators watched Marcus's preparation with a mixture of respect and sympathy that reflected their understanding of the challenge he faced. Even those who had initially dismissed him as inferior now recognized his achievements, but most believed that Vorthak represented an insurmountable obstacle that would finally demonstrate the limits of human capability. Korvac the Destroyer had become something approaching a friend during Marcus's time at the arena, and his assessment of the upcoming match carried the brutal honesty that characterized all Xerian social interactions. Human Marcus, the massive reptilian warrior, had said during one of their training sessions, "You have achieved victories that honor your species." But Vorthak is beyond normal gladiatorial skill. He fights as if he were 6 separate warriors sharing perfect coordination. I have studied him for years and cannot identify weaknesses that strategy alone might exploit. Sci-Fi offered a different perspective based on her species' appreciation for cunning and indirect approaches to conflict resolution. Vorthak's perfection may itself be a weakness, she had hissed during one of their tactical discussions. Creatures who have never experienced true defeat sometimes lack the ability to adapt when their established methods fail. Your greatest advantage may be his expectation of inevitable victory. Marcus understood that both perspectives contained elements of truth, but his analysis had revealed possibilities that neither his allies nor his opponents had fully considered. Vorthak's supremacy was based on the assumption that arena combat followed predictable patterns that could be mastered through superior physical conditioning and tactical flexibility. What the champion had never faced was an opponent who could rewrite those patterns entirely, forcing combat into realms where established advantages might become liabilities. The arena masters had configured the championship arena to provide maximum spectacle while ensuring that both combatants could demonstrate their full capabilities. The fighting surface featured multiple levels and environmental hazards, but without the specific manipulation opportunities that had served Marcus so well in previous matches. This was intentional, forcing him to rely more heavily on direct combat skills while limiting his ability to exploit environmental advantages. Arena Master Xyloth observed the pre-fight preparations with patterns of energy fluctuation that indicated unprecedented levels of anticipation and analytical focus. The humans' rise to championship level had attracted attention from throughout the galactic community, with representatives from major civilizations attending specifically to witness whether the arena's most successful gladiator could be defeated by a species that possessed no apparent evolutionary advantages for combat. This match will determine more than gladiatorial supremacy, Xyloth communicated to its fellow masters. The outcome will influence how the galaxy perceives humanity's place in the cosmic hierarchy. If the human achieves victory, we must reconsider fundamental assumptions about the relationship between physical evolution and combat effectiveness. Vorthak himself had shown Marcus the respect due to a worthy opponent during their brief pre-fight interaction, but his confidence remained absolute. The champion had analyzed recordings of all Marcus's previous fights and believed he understood the principles underlying human tactical thinking well enough to develop effective countermeasures. "You have achieved remarkable success through innovative approaches," Vorthak had acknowledged during their formal meeting. "However, my species has perfected combat techniques over millions of years of evolutionary development. Your creativity is admirable, but it cannot overcome such fundamental advantages." Marcus had accepted this assessment without argument, recognizing that psychological warfare would be ineffective against an opponent who possessed both supreme confidence and the skills to justify that confidence. Instead, He focused his final preparations on refining techniques that he had developed specifically for this encounter, approaches that went beyond anything he had previously attempted. The crowd that assembled for the championship match represented the largest gathering in the arena's history, with beings traveling from across the galaxy to witness what many considered the most significant gladiatorial contest in generations. The betting pools remained closely contested, reflecting genuine uncertainty about whether established patterns of combat supremacy would continue or be fundamentally disrupted by human innovation. As the final countdown began, Marcus stood in his staging area with the same composure that had characterized all his previous fights, but with an additional quality that careful observers might have recognized as complete acceptance of whatever outcome the next hour might bring. He had prepared everything possible, analyzed every available advantage, and developed strategies that pushed the absolute limits of what human ingenuity could achieve in gladiatorial combat. Vorthak waited in his staging area with the patient confidence of a creature that had never doubted the outcome of any fight, his 6 limbs performing subtle warm-up movements while his multiple nerve clusters prepared for the complex coordination that made his fighting style so devastating. The arena barriers dissolved, revealing the championship combat zone in all its carefully designed complexity. The moment that would determine Marcus's ultimate place in gladiatorial history had finally arrived. The galaxy held its breath as human and alien champion faced each other across the arena floor, each representing fundamentally different approaches to the ancient art of war. The combat signal resonated through the arena one final time, and the match that would redefine the galaxy's understanding of human potential finally began.